How about this, guys? Like I know when years that I'm not competing, like I run experiments or just new methods with my athletes. And like, for example, like the recovery diet, once we kind of standardized things there a little bit, I remember in 14, like this was 3 preps ago. So I did 14, 17, 22. I remember I did reverse out, but I was getting to that point. I'm like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, it's like I'm waiting 6 months to actually feel like I can progress like in the gym. So, we started running that with athletes and I'm like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Like they're like, they're complaining like week 3 and 4, but then like 2 months later, they're like, I'm so glad you got me out of there. Like this was a terrific call. And the same thing with like the multiple day refeeds. Like, we've been on podcasts, you and I, Brian, like debating like the utility in them. And, we have found them to work very well for our athletes. So same thing there. I remember 17 was like my first shot to like formally like give those a try. Are there any things that you guys have been toying around with your athletes that you're like, ooh, this might be a good idea, when it comes to my own prep?
I think one thing that I've used with a couple people is just having, if there's a couple days that are just very easy for somebody where maybe they're not training, or it's a very, like having one day that's quite a bit lower calorically than some of the others, that's an easy buffer, to strip some fat loss off, and then, allows them to eat a little bit more on the other days. Sometimes if I do like 2 consecutive refeeds, maybe the first day back being somewhat more assertive in terms of the deficit. Because usually you'll still feel fine at that point, or, you'll feel at least more intact than you would be 5 days deep into the low days. But, but for the most part, like I'm still using like the multi-day refeeds, similar to how we did. But yeah, maybe occasionally just having like some non-linear low days where, there's some variability there depending on the workload, their schedule, and things like that.
Brett? I've kind of found out that I'm traditionally too conservative with peaking, and I'm excited on myself to try out things that are a little bit more aggressive. I had a really interesting peak, actually multiple peaks, for a gentleman that I worked with this year. Have you guys ever like wanted to have somebody after their show like track every macro and every calorie of everything they ate? Because we always hear that amazing look the day after the show, right? When we went out to eat and we ate, the big Mexican meal. We had Cold Stone Creamery and all these goodies after the show, and then the next day they talk about how they look amazing. And I actually had a client this year that did that very same thing, but he tracked meticulously everything that he ate. He dissected his cheeseburger and weighed everything and then put it back together again. And every peak that we did, we got more aggressive and more aggressive. And really, to be honest with you, the last peak, I was nervous because we were really aggressive. Fat, in the hundreds, and carbs, between the 5s and the 6s. And I was amazed with what I saw. I was really amazed because we had this great data. He tracked everything after his show when he had all of his good treats and everything. And we used all of that data to dial in our peaks, and we got better and better and better with every single show. And I've seen it a little bit with folks when they kind of fall off the wagon a little bit and they go over they have their emotional episodes with eating, right? And I found out that there's a little bit more to get away with there than I had previously thought. I mean, even with myself, I've only seen myself like really truly spilled one time, and that was when I basically ate 10,000 calories and 222 grams of fat from cookies. Maybe there's a little bit of middle ground in there between where I traditionally kind of peak and that extreme. And I'm kind of excited to kind of play around with that a little bit. Hence why I kind of want to, trial things just a little bit.
I think one I want to play with is especially athletes that I've I trust their intuition a little bit more. They're more experienced, like their instincts or gut feelings about things. Like our caloric ranges can be quite broad. So for example, with like Dirk, I think towards the end to get him in this like best shape, calories were, it's like, oh, you got anywhere from like, this would freak out most preppers because, they think the numbers we spit out are just like, they're golden. Like that is the magic number basically, but we're not that good. It's a rough estimate. Like this seems appropriate given everything we know, but it was around, I think 1,400 to 1,700 calories. And it was like, Dirk, you roll with the day, like, take into consideration your training status, what, like not just recovery, but what you have that day, like how's the day in regards to personal stress, your hunger, your levels of flatness, all this. And then based off that, you decide, like, is it a 1,400 calorie day or is it a 1,700 calorie day? And I think you can get athletes to, and this is the comparison I made for him, as like, have you ever been in one of those spin classes where the instructor's just like, you have to follow him? And it's like playing defense in any sport. It's like you're kind of a step behind all the time. So it's like it's rougher than like you kind of just doing some sort of interval training like at your own pace, right? Like usually you can get more out of yourself when you're kind of the one in control over the situation. You feel like you have some autonomy there. So I've noticed it with athletes when you give them the ability to, when we're digging especially, to like dig, but then there's like dig extra hard. They're able to get a whole lot more out of themselves because they get to decide. It's one of those things where it just feels, you feel less trapped. Like there's many levels to restriction, right? And having a range, like it gets the best out of people is what I've noticed. Like he would usually call the shots like somewhere in the evening, I guess, and be like, hey, you know what? I think today could be a 1,400 calorie day. Let's roll with it. But sometimes I'm sure it's the other way where like you wake up and you're like, I'm 1,400 calorie good. And then the day takes its toll and you're like, you know what? I'm probably going to need a few extra 100 calories. So I think I'd like to expose myself or give myself the option to dig to places that I've never dug to before. And again, it's like you just kind of roll with the day, see what kind of day it is, and be like, yo, like, babe, today, don't cook me a potato. We're doing just steak, and we're calling it a day. So I think, expanding things even more so for myself when it comes to that digging period. Because when you see a lot of the guys that have really pushed their conditioning to that new level, like I remember with Brett Freeman, like he was always a guy that his, doesn't always reflect on calories, but his carbohydrate intake would always be somewhere like in the low to mid 200s. And, he gets striated glutes off that. And then, he worked with Cliff, and Cliff challenged him and really pushed him into like that point where he was like sub 100 at times on certain days of the week. And that got him to that next level. So, I guess I just want to expose myself to the elements, like for sure this go around, to make it really worth my time. But I want to do that with like some sort of nice buffer so that I can kind of pace it and strike when I want to, because it's worked really well with certain athletes. It's like, hey, you could do 50 grams of carbs or you could do 100. Totally up to you. And they not only push themselves better, but since it's self-inflicted as opposed to like me, like over here with a whip, they just don't look nearly as beat up because, they have control over the situation.
No, I like that a lot. And, I use ranges quite a bit with my athletes, and the magnitude of the range can, depend on the situation. But I do like the idea of, if I happen to have a day during prep where I'm not as hungry, or maybe I'm not training, It's like if I'm not gonna be playing like macro Tetris at the end of the day, getting up to the numbers that are assigned to me. So I think that's from a behavioral perspective, I think that's a great way to go about it. Not to mention, all of the benefits you discussed, but it educates them on like how nutrition and energy balance, how that all kind of works, rather than, these three magical numbers that you're hitting at the end of the day, even if you're not hungry, or say you're ravenously hungry, had a high volume leg day, and you feel like, oh, I could probably benefit from an extra 50 carbs, but feel guilty doing it.
Yep.
It's just that autonomy. I think there's people that aren't 100%. They don't feel 100% ready for that, but once you give them that option, I think it organizes for them, and within a month, most of them are pretty happy with that approach.
I was just going to say I might do it without a body weight scale, just for fun.
That'd be interesting.
The only thing that's like, it's kind of like I have like all those people who are addicted to MyFitnessPal and it has the streak.
Ew.
Like that's the only thing that will look. It's like, oh, but like, how am I going to compare 163 last time to 163 this time? So I'm considering that, just because I do think it can be a distraction at times, and you do enough of these things, like what lines should be in at this point and that point, and so considering it, we'll see. That one's hard to let go, just because the data, right?
Just have Cynthia look at it. You don't have to look at it. She can record it for you.
Sure, she'll love that gig.
That's one thing I learned in my little prep positioning diet, is I learned what was kind of appropriately hungry. I knew how hungry that I needed to be in order to keep the scale kind of moving downwards slowly. But then I also kind of knew, okay, well, you know what? This is too hungry at this point. I need to, like you said, Alberto, I need to have a few extra 100 calories, or I need to kind of squeeze in a little extra meal here or there. And that's kind of something that I've never really utilized before. And I am probably gonna, I don't know if I'll do that the whole prep, but I'm definitely gonna do that in January, when I kind of start easing back in and, like I said, turning that volume up, right? I'm gonna kind of use that feeling of being appropriately hungry and being, I guess, even appropriately fatigued, right? To where you're not trashed and you literally feel like you just got, beat up. But at the same time, just know that, okay, this is normal. This is how I should feel. And then likewise, you use those intuitive signals when it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I've beat myself up here long enough. I've been fatigued long enough. Now I can kind of bring things up a little bit and not be quite so fatigued. And then, kind of live there for a little while when I know that I'm ready to kind of start digging again. So I'll probably at some point have to kind of, like Brian said, go to the magic 3 numbers or go to the meal plan or whatever. But I'm sure not going to do that coming out of the gate. I'm gonna kind of start using these new kind of intuitive signals that I learned during the prep positioning phase, with not only hunger and being hungry and being appropriately hungry and then appropriately satisfied, but then also just how my body feels normally under normal circumstances, but then also in training as well.
Yeah, that's like dieting for prep. It's almost like an art form when you get it to that point where you're so in tune with what you require. And yeah, I don't think the message here is, for everybody to take that approach, but yeah, I think people should challenge themselves when it comes to their hunger cues, and being able to trust those a little bit, distinguishing between, am I hungry or am I just craving something right now? And you're going to be hungry. Like there's going to be genuine hunger there that you have to wait out. I think that's just where staying busy makes a big difference. I mean, my first prep, I like basically waiting around for my next meal, whereas now it's like I might forget to eat, and it's like, oh shit, like I it's been 6 hours since I had any protein, and I'm not saying that's optimal, but you want to get to it. I'm glad I'm to that point now, where I'm not focused on like eating at a set time every single day. It's more flexible.
Yeah, speaking of which, like first person I kind of gave that autonomy to, his name was Dean Lester. He probably listens to this one, so give him some shout outs because the calories were so low that I guess where the 50 gram of carb thing came up in my mind. It's like, oh my God, you assigned yourself 50 grams of carbs. And I was like, bro, had I assigned you that, like that would have been absorbed very, very differently. So yeah, I think it's in your best interest to be able to gather that sort of information and like be able to relay it over to your coach, because I think sometimes the athletes expect that, like, all we want on our side is like toughness and grit, but it's better to I'd much rather know that like you're kind of fading away here, you don't know if you can make it, you've been this close to just like emptying out like the cabinets, like that sort of stuff is really important. It doesn't mean we're going to throw in the towel. It just means like, okay, perhaps we have to make some changes to our base structure. And I know for myself, like the more I've been able to sympathize with like how I'm feeling, the more I've been able to, get at it myself. I think people do that very naturally with like the loads they're going to lift at the gym. Like they're totally okay with like, hey, today I'm not going to hit my usual weights. I'm just going to have to bring it down a notch, and that's fine. And they see the rhyme and the reason for that. But when it comes to, starving yourself over the course of a contest prep, that hits people in the ego a little bit.